It is the fracture of her first rib.
Because it looks like these otters are fixing to have relations right
Still
next
have
to
the
that
power
dam.
to soothe
And help
myself,
on
but the irrepressible power of
You wake up alive. You wake up alive. You wake up alive. For so long, feel my wings sometimes.
500 words or less. Tell a complete story. Sometimes have a twist ending. The rules of flash fiction are simple but challenging, and have drawn a group of writers to the Little Falls Public Library each week to share their work. They add one additional rule. The word of the week must be used someplace in the story. FlashCast is a showcase of their work, and each episode will feature stories inspired from the word of the week. The content that arises is astounding, the talent superb, and the creativity infectious. These stories are streaks of lightning, charged, compressed, and certain to entertain. Welcome to FlashCast.
The night the horrors came. They ripped one of my arms off, the monsters, and all I could do was stand there, frozen in place, unable to even scream my shock and pain. Lopey, squishy things, the howling, shambling sacks of meat looking on my shattered limb with some rudiment equivalent of pride. But how could such grotesques be proud of anything? The large one bellowing deep, the smaller shrieking in higher pitches as they gathered around to hold in foul regard my open arm? Was the rumbling thing their leader, their chief, their general, their king? I doubted such things complex enough to be that organized. The creature most likely simply the largest, leading by force, strongest only from getting choicest parts of some slaughtered goat, or whatever they ate, the big dumb bastards. They took my detached limb to a nearby clearing with a note of almost reverence, where I could see a pile of other broken arms still weeping lifeblood, others long dry. They held it up to the sky and seemed to be selecting a worthy mate for what was once mine, picking the right one out of their savage collection of leavings. God, what was I looking at? So frozen in my fear. Was this a rite? Was this why they left me so destroyed? Was this their crude attempt at a faith? A butcher's gore-soaked communion with divinity? It was hard to imagine them that intelligent or conceive a god or goddess quite that hard-hearted. The big lump eventually found his match for that wrenched from my flesh, held them up to the sky for the little ones to witness, or maybe to be better seen by their gods up there, and then, of all things, started rubbing them together? Rubbing, faster. First the booming one, then all the shrill ghouls too. They started chanting out a word, maybe the name of their dark god. Friction. Maybe it was a name anyway. Maybe friction was their word for supplication or to call down some cruel glory. Friction as their hallelujah. Friction as their wailed hosannas. As their holy creed. Friction. Then the damnedest thing of all, there was smoke where my limb met the other, and finally a fire there amidst their chants of friction. Some eldritch demon set those arms ablaze, and when they caught in full, in rapt jubilation, they threw them into the pile and sent the entire horror show up into a roaring, wicked flame. These half-sketched creatures and their heartless lord that took my arm in tribute, for all their mindless terror, they did know some terrible fire magic after all. And so I remained there, rooted to the ground, amazed and afraid as I watched them celebrate their inferno deep into the night as the embers faded. And when they left their foul encampment that next morning, I could only pray to my own gods that they would never return to my forest with their friction.
Traders at the Gate. Mary stood near the window, peering around the gold fringe of the emerald green velvet draperies that hung on the tall windows in the parlor of the mansion where she and her husband, the Lord Mayor, lived. Her handkerchief turned slowly as she fingered the embroidered M on each corner as she watched a crowd gather outside the gate walkway. Looking for comfort, she was drawn to the fireplace, her slippers bumping the hem of her ermine-trimmed blue and silver brocade gown as she walked. Normally, she would not wear this ornate gown, but it was the only one that fit her atrophied body. I must visit my dressmaker one of these days, she thought. She plunked down in her favorite chair and stared at the fire. The mesmerizing flames brought tears of sadness, depression, frustration, and now fear. For a few minutes she wept, then dabbed her eyes. A slight knock at the door announced the butler. "A message for Lord Mayor, from the governor's messenger, miss. I brought it to you in his absence," he explained, handing her the envelope. "Traitors have been performing treacherous acts. Be on your guard," it read. She sat straight upright in the chair, her jaw clenched, her eyes bore into the flames, matching fire with fire. Her hands began to twitch as she gathered the handkerchief, crushing it, then tugging it again and again. Over and over she crushed and tugged, faster and faster. A soft knock at the door announced the butler with tea service. Setting the tray down on the side table, he asked, "Is there any?" She jumped to her feet. He stopped with gaping mouth as she shouted, "They should shoot Thomas Paine for agitating this friction. Don't people realize Cousin George could have his British army crush them in an instant?" The butler, remembering the words of his wise grandfather who said, "Sometimes the right answer is no answer," he took 2 large steps backwards and left unnoticed. Mary had returned to the window and was looking out. The crowd was now becoming a mob. "There she is," she heard a man shout. "Where's the Lord Mayor? We want him too," yelled another. The blood drained from her face, her flesh turned clammy, and her heartbeat raced, pounding in her ears as her hands trembled. Quickly she turned on her heel. Nauseated, she backed out of view into the velvet drapery. Her husband entered the room, seeing her distress, and rushed to embrace her. When he crossed in front of the windows, a shout rang out, "There he is!" The shattered glass was heard when the first stone broke the window. Then a second, and a third flew into the room. Now inside the gate, they pounded at the door and stormed through the broken windows. "Tar and feathers is good enough for the likes of them."
The Fourth Apprentice. Melisandre's first 2 apprentices simply disappeared. After some questioning of the locals, I learned the third now lived in a hole he dug in the riverbank, because he believes he's an otter. It wasn't hard to find the hole. "Peter Littleton, come out and talk to me." I heard a scuffling and splattering somewhere back in the muddy darkness. Soon an equally muddy face appeared, blinking in the sunlight. "I'm a humble river otter. I don't know this Peter Littleton you refer to." "River otters keep their fur clean and their dens dry. That one's going to become terribly uncomfortable come winter." "I rather thought so," Peter the river otter said. "Still, I haven't been a river otter that long, so I'm hardly to blame if I haven't got it sorted yet." "Did Melisandre make you a river otter?" I asked. "Not exactly. I just said that I hated being his apprentice and I'd rather be anything else." And he said, "How about a river otter?" Peter frowned. "How did you know?" "Lucky guess. I'm going to see him now. Tell him I'm doing my best, won't you?" Oh, I had plenty to tell him, I thought, but the questions came first. "What did you do to the first 2? Turn them into bees?" Melisandre looked defensive. "Those louts, they just ran away. I have no idea what happened to them after that." "So, rather than return to their homes, they just kept running to be as far from you as possible. That I can believe. But what about Mr. Littleton?" "Well, it's not as if I didn't give him a choice. Be fair." I glowered at him, and I do a pretty convincing glower, if I do say so myself. "Take it off. I mean now." He looked away. "Oh, all right." The humor had gone out of it anyway. He picked up a small bundle of twigs tied with blue thread and snapped it in 2. There, he'll have one more muddy night. In the morning he'll remember that he's not an otter. Served him right, though. He broke my favorite alembic. I rubbed my eyes, probably looking as weary as I felt. You know how the council feels about friction in the ranks of apprentices, and as Archmage, it's my responsibility to enforce the rules. And it's your duty as a magician to pass on your skills. And you especially. You're the best magician of the 12. He looked at me. Only second best of the 13, though. Flatterer. Honestly, Sandy, what am I going to do with you? Give me a stern warning? I take that as a given, but it's not all I'm going to do. He looked a little worried. Good. What are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to choose your next apprentice personally. I already have someone in mind, and I promise if you try that otter nonsense with her, you will regret it. But, sweetheart, no buts. Get changed. We're meeting your parents for dinner. Melisandre called the Grim, just sighed again. Yes, dear.